It was a warm, humid Thursday night in Atlanta. The city still seemed to hum gently, the heat of the day lingering in the air. Streetlights cast soft yellow glows on the slick pavement, where a light mist hovered just above the asphalt. Across the street, a black SUV sat parked, its interior lights off. Inside was a middle-aged man in a gray hoodie and low-pulled cap. Just another passerby, easily overlooked. No one recognized him, but that man was Marcus Bellamy, founder of the beloved Southern restaurant chain, Soul and Spice. He had spent nearly 2 decades building this brand from the ground up, starting in his mother's kitchen back in Georgia. But tonight, he wasn't here to be greeted with handshakes or smiles. He wasn't here as a CEO. He came as a quiet observer. Just days earlier, vague customer complaints had reached his desk. No specific accusations, just subtle mentions of cold attitudes and off-putting service from a particular location. Marcus knew the signs. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire. And if something was wrong with the culture, he believed, the person at the top should be the first to step inside. He turned off the engine, adjusted his cap, and quietly opened the door. The small bell above the restaurant's entrance jingled as he walked in. No one knew that the man who had just walked through the door was the very soul behind Soul and Spice. The glass door shut softly behind him. Marcus paused for a moment, letting the atmosphere sink in. Inside, this Soul and Spice location still held the familiar design he'd once approved. Warm wooden textures, gentle lighting, and black and white frame photographs along the hallway. Portraits of black mothers beside steaming pots of food. A space meant to make anyone feel welcome, like they were stepping back into a family kitchen. But something felt off. Just seconds after entering, the tone changed. At the front counter, 2 young employees laughed loudly. Not the kind of laughter that fills a room with joy, but the kind that cuts. Marcus slowed his steps, careful not to draw attention. He chose a table in the far corner, where he could watch everything, while staying invisible. He sat down, opened the menu, and then heard it. "Check out that guy. Looks like he just bombed a job interview for the 3rd time." The voice came from one of the 2 employees behind the counter. Laughter followed. Marcus didn't lift his head. He didn't need to. He knew the man they were mocking, slightly wrinkled blazer, glasses slipping down his nose, hadn't done anything wrong, but he had become the punchline for dressing a little less impressive. "If they can talk about me like this, they'll talk about anyone." Marcus clenched his hands gently beneath the table, though his face stayed calm. He ordered his meal, politely, quietly, and waited to see what else would surface, now that they thought he was just another nobody. Marcus remained in his corner seat, his cup of tea still warm in front of him. The restaurant wasn't busy now. A couple sat to his left, sharing a quiet meal. A young mother with her son waited at the counter, counting change. Then, the front door opened with a soft chime. An elderly man, perhaps in his 70s, stepped in slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He wore a worn-out button-up shirt and faded khaki pants. Each step looked deliberate, respectful even, like he didn't want to rush the floor beneath his feet. Marcus watched, not out of curiosity, but because the man reminded him of his late grandfather. But before the memory could even settle, he heard it. "Yo, look at this dude, straight out of The Walking Dead." One of the employees snorted. The other chimed in. "Bet he's just gonna order soup and sit there for an hour. Tip like $2. More laughter. Marcus sat up straighter in his seat. His chest tightened. Not with anger, but with quiet disappointment. Deep, sharp, and personal. Moments later, a woman in a faded hoodie stepped in. Her hands clutched a worn-out wallet, eyes darting toward the floor. She ordered takeout, then carefully counted out coins, one by one, and again, a voice behind the counter. "Looks like she just broke the piggy bank for a plate of chicken." A mocking whistle followed. Marcus felt something squeeze in his throat. He placed a hand over his chest, not because of pain, but to hold himself back. Then just when he thought it couldn't go further, he became the next joke. "Check out the guy in the corner, sitting up all proper, dressed like he's waiting to be interviewed for night shift manager or something." This time Marcus lifted his gaze. His eyes briefly met one of the employees. No anger, no smirk, no reaction. Just the quiet, steady stare of a man who knew far more than they ever imagined. It's not that they didn't know who I was, he thought. It's that they assumed no one in the room was worth respecting. Marcus stayed right where he was, back straight, hands folded calmly in front of him. He didn't react. He didn't call a manager. He didn't reveal who he was. Not because he wasn't angry, but because he wanted to see it all, to understand. Was this just the behavior of a few careless staff members? Or was it a symptom of something deeper, a culture that had quietly gone wrong? A server brought his food. She moved quickly, head slightly bowed, avoiding eye contact. Not rude, but not warm either. Marcus nodded and thanked her. He looked her in the eyes, just for a moment, and saw something there. Not indifference, but exhaustion, like someone who had stopped trying to care out loud. He began observing more closely, not just with his eyes, but with his intuition. Customers walked in. No one greeted them. A woman asked for more water, twice right before anyone noticed. The same laughter behind the counter kept going. Marcus opened his phone and started jotting down notes, not for evidence, but to remember the feeling, the ache of watching a place he'd built with love, slowly drifting from its values. He quietly finished his meal, wiped his mouth, placed a generous tip, 5 times the bill, beneath his napkin, then stood up. No dramatic pause, no statement, no confrontation, just one last glance toward the counter, where 2 young men still had no idea that the person they'd spent the evening mocking and ignoring was the very man who signed their paychecks. It was nearly 10 p.m. The restaurant was quiet. Tables were empty. The last customers had gone. Marcus remained, seated near the front window now. Streetlights spilled in through the glass, lighting half his face. The calm part, not the silent storm inside. When the staff began cleaning up, Marcus stood and walked to the counter. The same 2 employees were there, wiping surfaces, still joking under their breath. He nodded and said evenly, "I'd like to speak with both of you. Just a few minutes. In the break room." They exchanged a quick look, confused, slightly annoyed, like they were being bothered by a random customer, but they followed him anyway. No one knew that the next few minutes would change everything. The door to the break room clicked shut, a small space. Lockers, 2 plastic chairs, and silence. Marcus stood before them. He slowly removed his cap, unzipped his hoodie. From his pocket, he pulled out an ID badge. Marcus Bellamy, founder and CEO, Soul and Spice Group. No dramatic reveal, no raised voice, just truth, held like steel. The employees froze. One of them stammered, we didn't know." Marcus raised his hand gently. He didn't need their excuses. "I didn't come here to listen to you explain yourselves," he said, voice firm but calm. "I came to see for myself what's happening under my name." He took a slow step closer. "You call it joking around. I call it disrespect. That elderly man walking with a cane, he's not a character from a horror movie. That mother counting coins, she's not your entertainment. And I, dressed like any other customer, am not here to be mocked." They said nothing. "I don't care how fast you serve. If you can't serve with heart, you don't belong in this place." Marcus let the weight of those words settle. Then with finality, "As of now, both of you are suspended. An internal review will follow. No yelling, no humiliation, just clarity and consequences." As he left the room, the door shut quietly behind him. And in that silence, the 2 young men realized something they hadn't understood all night. They hadn't just disrespected customers. They disrespected the soul of the place they worked in. The next morning, Atlanta was wrapped in a gentle rain. Marcus sat in the manager's office at the same location, a place he'd rarely visited, trusting that his team could run things smoothly. But now trust wasn't enough. Now he needed to understand. The 2 employees had been officially suspended, pending an internal review. A system-wide email went out. No dramatic announcement, no finger pointing, just a quiet message that read, "Effective immediately, we are reviewing our customer service culture and accountability standards." Then Marcus got to work. Not through assistants, not through regional managers. He did it himself, face to face, conversation by conversation. Each morning he returned to the same restaurant, sat down with every remaining employee, not as a CEO, but as a man who needed the truth. And the truth came. Not all at once, but slowly, like a leak through old pipes. A cashier whispered, "Honestly, I've seen stuff like that happen. But if you speak up, you get pushed out." A kitchen worker admitted, "The manager knew. He just didn't want conflict, said customers today are too sensitive." An older server sighed, "I've just been trying to do my job. But lately, this place feels heavy, like kindness is something you have to hide." That was what hurt Marcus the most. Not the words, but the eyes of those who had once wanted to speak up and chose silence instead, just to survive. He began sketching out the deeper culture behind what he had witnessed: behavior, peer response, silence, acceptance. A cycle, a slow, quiet rot, a place where empathy was shrinking and coldness had become normal. Later that day, Marcus stood in front of the mirror in the men's restroom, not to check his reflection, but to meet his own eyes. He looked tired, but clear, and he told himself, if this is a cultural failure, then it's my responsibility to fix it. You don't rebuild a house by repainting the walls. You go down to the foundation. In the days that followed, Marcus didn't return to his corporate office. He spent his mornings, and often his afternoons, at the same restaurant. Not to supervise, but to listen. No clipboard, no camera, no scripted interviews. Just Marcus, a worn notebook, and honest one-on-one conversations. And slowly, the truth emerged. Not like a scandal, but like a quiet infection, spreading behind the scenes. A cashier said softly, "This stuff happens more than it should, but speaking up, that just makes you a target." A line cook admitted, "The manager, he knew. He just didn't want drama. Said we need to keep it light with customers." A longtime waitress looked away as she said, "I try to be kind, I do. But lately, it feels like kindness makes you weak around here." Marcus took it all in. It wasn't just about two employees. This was about a culture, one that had slowly made cruelty acceptable and silence normal. He drew a simple diagram in his notebook. Disrespect, no accountability, fear, quiet acceptance. It was a loop, and like any closed loop, it trapped good people inside. What disturbed him the most wasn't what people did. It was what they felt forced to ignore. He realized many of his staff weren't unkind. They were simply exhausted, isolated, conditioned to keep their heads down. And above all, they lacked someone to stand up first. That night, Marcus sat alone in the break room. Pages of notes surrounded him. Patterns were clear now. He looked out the window as rain drizzled on the glass, and he thought, no one is born indifferent. They become that way when they stop believing their voice matters. And that, he decided, was the first thing he needed to restore. That day, Marcus sat alone in the break room. His notebook lay open, pages filled with stories, quotes, quiet truths. And yet, something still felt missing. One more voice, one more piece that hadn't been spoken aloud. Then the door creaked open. A soft voice called out, "Mr. Marcus, do you have a minute?" It was Janelle, a 24-year-old floor server. Petite, soft-spoken, glasses sliding down her nose. Marcus had noticed her before, always polite, always quiet, always passing through like she didn't want to take up space. He smiled gently and nodded. Janelle sat down, hands nervously clasped in her lap. Her voice trembled, but her eyes, when she finally looked up, were steady. "I've known about what's been happening," she said. "I've known for a while, but every time I wanted to say something, I just felt too small." Marcus didn't interrupt. He knew this was something she had carried silently for far too long. "One time I heard a coworker making fun of a mom with 3 kids," she continued. "Said she looked homeless. I was so angry. I spoke up, and they laughed at me. Said I was being too sensitive. After that, I stopped. I just kept my head down, did my job. But inside, I always felt guilty." Her voice cracked, not with weakness, but with honesty. I didn't want to lose my job, but I didn't want to lose who I am either. Marcus sat quietly for a long moment. Then, with sincerity in his voice, he said, "You weren't wrong to be afraid, but you are incredibly brave for still holding on to your heart." And in that small, unassuming room, something shifted. Not in Marcus, not in the system, but in the air itself. Because someone had finally stood up, not with noise, but with truth. And Marcus knew, even in the ashes of silence, a single spark of integrity is enough to reignite the whole fire. And Janelle was that spark. 1 week after that quiet conversation with Janelle, Marcus returned to the restaurant. Not as a guest, not undercover. This time he walked through the front doors as the founder, and everything stopped. Staff were called into a full team meeting, the first of its kind since the place had opened. No one knew what to expect. No one could sit still. Marcus stood in the center of the room, his expression calm but resolute. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't bring up past mistakes. He simply began with this. I didn't build Soul and Spice just to serve food. I built it to serve people. And that means every person who walks through that door, no matter what they wear, what they carry, or what they can afford, deserves to feel respected. He turned to a whiteboard and drew 3 circles. This is the customer. This is you. And this is dignity. If any one of these breaks, the whole system collapses. Then came the changes. Clear and unapologetic. All staff would undergo retraining with a focus on empathy, service, and integrity. An anonymous feedback system would be launched immediately, so no one would have to stay silent out of fear. And most importantly, those who had stayed quiet out of fear would now be protected, not punished. And then, Marcus turned to Janelle, standing quietly in the back. He called her name. The room turned. Janelle, he said, starting today, I'm appointing you as the new manager of this location. She froze, hand to her mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. Marcus stepped forward, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and continued. Not because of seniority, but because you showed courage and integrity when no one else would. I don't need a manager who knows how to fill out schedules. I need one who knows when to say, this isn't right, even when she's the only voice in the room. No applause, just silence. The kind that signals something real has happened. In that moment, the restaurant didn't just get a new leader. It got a new soul. In the weeks that followed, something shifted inside that once troubled Soul and Spice location. Customers began to feel it, not through signs or slogans, but in how they were greeted, in how servers listened, and how the new manager, Janelle, walked the floor with a quiet kind of confidence that came from doing what was right, not what was easy. Word of the transformation spread, slowly at first, then further. Marcus didn't hold a press conference. He didn't post a PR statement. Instead, he sent a quiet message to all store managers in the system. I used to think rules would keep things in line. Now I know it's the hearts of our people that define the path. Starting today, we don't serve just with skill. We serve with respect, as a standard, not a suggestion. All 30-plus Soul and Spice locations launched a new training initiative, Serve with Soul. It wasn't just about customer service. It taught team members how to recognize unconscious bias, how to speak up when someone else crossed the line, and how to be a light, even when you're the only one shining in the room. One of the 2 suspended employees asked to return. Marcus agreed, on one condition. You'll complete the full empathy and accountability program, and then you'll share what you've learned with the team. That young man stood in front of the group 1 week later. His voice was unsteady but sincere. I used to think jokes like that were harmless, but now I understand words can be knives. I can't undo what I said, but I want to be better. Starting now. The other former employee chose to leave. Marcus didn't try to stop him, because he knew real change can't be forced. It has to come from within. Then Marcus launched something new, a monthly community event called The Table and the Truth, where customers and staff sat down together, not to talk about food, but about moments when they'd felt misunderstood or honored or seen. Because as Marcus wrote later in his journal, a good meal fills your stomach. But an honest conversation, that can heal a memory. 1 month after Marcus walked into that restaurant as a silent customer, everything had changed, but not in a flashy way. There were no banners, no big announcement, just a quiet shift in how people looked at each other, spoke to each other, treated each other. Janelle, once the girl afraid to speak, now led one of the top performing locations in the system. She held monthly heart talks with her team, not just about sales goals, but about how they were doing as people, how to protect kindness in a place that demanded speed, how to build strength through compassion. Marcus no longer showed up every day. He stepped back, not out of disinterest, but because he believed in what had taken root. He wrote in a company memo, "I used to think success was when people knew your brand. Now I know. Real success is when your values keep living, even when you're not in the room." A reporter once asked him, "Do you really think a story this small can change culture?" Marcus smiled and answered, "Respect isn't optional, it's the foundation. And sometimes all it takes is one person to stand still while the world spins, to remind everyone else which way is right. We can't all change the whole world, but we can choose every day to do what's right, even when no one's watching. And sometimes that's enough to change a world for someone else."